Welcome back to the Positively Jacked podcast. Nate and Jes, where we deal real-time strategies on nutrition, fitness, wellness, lifestyle trends, and try to prioritize positive psychological habits and the best practices. Our goal for each episode is to relay helpful information and topics relating to health, mental and physical, nutrition, lifestyle, habit formation. In addition, give real-time strategy that anyone can apply in the same day to help benefit themselves.
And today's episode, as you might have guessed from the title, is both on topic and off topic. We've been eager to record this podcast all year, but not for the reason that we're going to end up recording it today. As maybe you knew, we've been talking about our CrossFit Games trip all year. We were eager to discuss all the things that we love, the programming, the people, the community, and unfortunately, that's going to take a backseat today. So for those outside the space, we will be talking about the 2024 CrossFit Games in the context of, unfortunately, the tragedy that occurred on day one. We were there, and we just kind of want to process with you and talk about kind of where we are in our experiences with it. A little bit of a caveat, a little bit of a disclaimer. We're only going to stick to what we know and our own experiences. We're not going to dip into speculation. We're not going to dip into any conspiracy theories out of respect for those involved and to avoid spreading any misinformation. We just like to have kind of a thoughtful discussion around a really sensitive, difficult event, while still focusing on the broader context of the community and where we see it going forward. So just, be aware that this episode may be difficult for some of you to listen to, and we encourage you to prioritize your well-being as we navigate this delicate topic.
Absolutely. We're going to be going over what happened, kind of our interpretation as we were, because we were there, right? We were there for the whole weekend, got to see the execution of the event and everything like that. We're going to go over what we've been processing for roughly the last 10 days. It has been 10 days since the start of the games. And we're going to bring in the more bulk of our conversation with where we are currently and what do we think we should do, or where do we feel some of the best efforts could be made. So
Absolutely.
That's pretty much the episode. With regard to what happened, for anybody who is not in the CrossFit space and does not know, there was a tragedy on day one, event one. There was a 3.5 mile run into an 800-meter swim. Unfortunately, one of the leading males, Lazar Ðukić, I believe I'm saying that right. I apologize if I do that again. He, in the swim, passed away. He had drowned in the lake. And the rest of the weekend stemmed from that, quite a somber, very sad tone to the weekend. Not saying that we were looking forward to it, but it changed everything.
Absolutely.
It absolutely changed everything. And our team, a good chunk of our team, our group, was about 30 yards from the finish line, where when we arrived, they were lining up teams. There was a very large crowd there. It was an off-site location for this particular event, so it was not in the Dickies Center, and it was not around that area. And when we had marched over toward the start or the finish line, we were meeting with a few other people. And what I remember noticing more than anything was we saw some athletes finishing. We saw the teams line up, and out in the water, about 30 to 50 meters out in the water, we saw a small group, 2 people on paddle boards, several people swimming, with what I would describe as repetitive diving. One after the other, over and over, not quite knowing what was going on. We knew something was wrong when they removed the barricade for an EMS to come through with an ambulance. Following that was a fire truck. Following that was more police. Following that was a dive team.
Yeah.
After about 15 to 20 minutes had passed, we had been known that the team run swim event was canceled. and they asked everybody to leave the area. That's what I remember about the park and such. I don't know. You and I were there, but we both could be seeing different things.
Yeah, I think that's similar. I remember when we parked and we were crossing over the parking lot and walking toward where we ended up, where the finish line was, that there was already something going on. Like there was already some element of search or repetitive diving going on. And there were athletes that looked like they were just still coming out of the water.
Yeah.
So we were pretty much right there.
Mm-hmm.
So I just remember thinking, you know, like you said, that all these emergency vehicles started going through once they opened the barricade, and I just remember how slow it felt. It felt, you know, we're so used to what emergencies feel like, or when emergency vehicles are involved, there's this rapid response element, and it just felt like everything was literally crawling.
Yeah.
But I definitely felt that it definitely felt like something was wrong very soon after we arrived.
Yeah, absolutely. The tone was different.
Yep.
You know,
Just
and
an
we
itchy
both had
feeling.
gone to CrossFit Games in the past. It was different than anything we've ever noticed.
Right.
Once we left the area, most of us convened at our Airbnb. We had a good sized group, coaches and members, and the news broke that competitor Lazar had passed away. They had canceled the rest of the day's events. We did not know what the rest of the weekend was going to look like. I think, at least for myself and for at least a few members of our team, our immediate response was to dissociate and to try and, as best we could, make the best of our time together.
Definitely. I definitely think there was an element of it's not denial, but it's just like a complete shutdown of some part of your processing.
Yeah. It was
Like I fully recognize that yeah, exactly. Exactly. Is the disbelief followed quickly by, like, I don't know, like I just didn't allow myself to think about it.
Yeah, you have energy, you have almost nervous energy around it, and that you need to express it somewhere.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, we did what we do best. We tried to frame it. We tried to focus on what we could do with our group and get out of the house, kind of get our minds busy, and hope that more detail would lead to, I guess, a more complete feeling around the occurrence. And as it unfolded, I was hopeful that not only would it unfold, but it would also unfold to where an understanding and almost a closure would happen. But
I think I remember just feeling like you were just in the scroll. You know how when serious things happen, your first instinct is to go look at the news and go try to find others who might know the information, or just connect with other people who are there. And so I feel like that's what I did right away, because there was very little update about what was happening, what their process was, what their ideas were about how to handle this, because obviously it's unprecedented. We had gone to, obviously not going into Dickies knowing that the events were going to be canceled. We had headed over to Vendor Village.
right.
And we're just kind of, I don't know, it just felt like aimless wandering. Like I wasn't really even thinking about what we were seeing in there. Like we just kind of existed, and nobody was really providing any updates other than the cancellation of that day's events.
Yep.
We didn't receive another update from anybody with any knowledge of what was going on, other than maybe Andrew Hiller posting some things, until what, like 9 or 10 p.m.
I think that was when the official email had gone out, or message had gone out, that the following day's events would continue in a particular order and things would open up around a certain time.
Yeah, they were going to start with a memorial. I think that's what they said. And then I think, you know, it just had, I mean, I'll be really candid. It just had a feeling of ick. Like
The situation from Thursday or the tribute and rest of the weekend?
I think just the lack of information, which I understand from, it's an unprecedented thing, but it just felt like nobody knew what was going on. Nobody knew what to do. And I think that's when in my mind, I started to realize like how different this CrossFit Games organizationally was than previous years in Madison, or even previous years in Carson. It just felt like the whole city didn't know we were there. You just
I agree.
felt very detached.
I agree. So if anybody's wondering, I have gone to and coached at 3 CrossFit Games, 1 in Carson, 2 in Madison. Jes, you've been to how many?
I did 2017 and 2018, and then obviously I did regionals for several years as well.
Yeah, right. And so realistically, when it comes to the organization of events and execution, we've got some experience. Every year that I had experienced the games, it was a collective festival type feel. When you went to Madison, there were CrossFit Games athletes and jumbo heads and graphics and specific deals and stuff like that. Places where CrossFitters were going, they made specific menu choice. Like the whole town was not only behind it, but the area in which the CrossFit Games was consolidated to where everybody could intermingle as they needed to. But there were designated areas also if you just wanted to sit and hang out and eat. There were areas where if you wanted to go to Vendor Village, which was massive. There were tents themed with the title sponsors. There was the age group pavilion. There was the Coliseum. There was the field that they used. It was
very community designed. It was designed for community experience.
Absolutely. And what I would describe this year's games as far as where they were and how it was run was very disjointed, very separate. It was as though they had planned the entities of the games and the events in separate rooms and then never got together to really discuss flow or consolidation resources, experience. So from my frame of reference, we actually got really lucky with an Airbnb, thanks to Tyler. Great location. We were like 100 yards from walking to the main like walk areas. The Dickies Arena was where the competitors would compete. You had a ticket to get inside. Every time you went inside, you had to dump your water bottle or any hydration, and you had to empty your pockets and go through a metal detector. Very standard for a lot of sports venues. Makes sense. They had some food choices. They had the main arena food places open, which is like hot dogs, burgers, overcooked pretzels, like things that you would expect to see at a ball game, right? Yeah. And then there was like a few places that were a little bit more towards the health conscientious. So it was almost as like, wow, did you guys not realize the audience that you were going to have here?
Yeah.
And then about, I want to say a half to 3/4 of a mile away was Vendor Village.
It's like a half.
It was about a half. Well, my watch defaulted to my daily walks of going between these two places too. And you're in Texas in August, and it was 100+ degrees heat every day. And when you went to the Vendor Village area, there were 3 food tents outside with like a cooling fan area near them. And then when you went into Vendor Village, you had to do the exact same thing that you did to go into Dickies. You had a separate festival ticket. You had to empty your pockets, go through metal detectors, go through inspection, and empty your waters. And then you got into Vendor. And that was where the affiliate experience was. And that was where all of the vendors that bought and wanted community presence were. And it was where the like communal group like watching area was.
Mm-hmm.
The communal group watching area could have facilitated 50 people, maybe, with the tables they had there. Super small. The lines to both places always got ridiculously long because there was no cohesion of entryway. Like It was just every time you tried to go into one area or the other, there was 10 steps in order to get there, and it just delayed everything that you wanted to get to, which is so different than Madison. And then the other thing that really kind of bugged me was there wasn't any gusto to it. Everybody felt that when they were there, it was a big chore. And even like in talking to a few vendors and stuff like that, like they were making the best of the situation, you know, especially after everything that had happened. But it was just one of those things like there was a very flat energy that you could feel, and not just because of the traumatic event, but because of the structure of how it was put together.
Yeah, it felt very deflated. And in addition to all the logistical things that we were that were a headache. I mean, thankfully our Airbnb was so close. I don't know what we would have had to do if we were driving and paying for parking, and then you're like stuck there all day, having to go back and forth between all those security checks. That would have been a lot. It just felt like the town itself didn't know we were there even.
They didn't.
There was not there was not a lot of areas around to get food or cool off or anything. We went places and they were not prepared. It was like, you know, when we went to Madison, it was like people prepped. People had some notice, and they, you know, restaurants were running out of food. You couldn't even get into them. Serving staff was very confused and overwhelmed.
And so were the stadium and the event workers. I will say that.
Yep.
Side caveat, I tried to be as kind as I could to those people, because you could tell they were exhausted. They were not prepared for what turnaround and activity at these stations would be.
Some of them said that we talked to one person who said that they had been there since like 6 or 6:30 a.m. and it was evening.
Yeah.
It was the evening events when I talked to them.
Yep. And so the event itself, even if you take away the traumatic event and the death of Lazar, was very odd compared to what we have experienced in the past and grown to almost expect now.
Yep.
As far as moving forward from the event itself and the tragedy, processing it has been interesting. I will start with saying that we were looking very much forward to them hopefully doing right by Lazar and having a good tribute for him. I have no problem speaking about this because I wrote it publicly. I feel it was flat and incomplete.
It felt, I guess, to back up. So we woke up on Friday.
Yes.
And obviously wanted to attend once they, you know, posted late that night that events would continue. We were, of course, going to go support the community. I was on board with whatever they decided.
Yes.
If they had decided to cancel, would have been fine, would have been understandable. Actually, you know, in all retrospect, I wish they kind of had. It would have been a lot easier on the athletes, I think. But I, you know, what is it? Fred Rogers always said, look for the helpers. I was prepared to be an emotional support animal to whoever needed me in that venue.
And we were.
The entire weekend. Oh, we were. I hugged so many people.
Yeah.
I cried with people I've never met. I was ready to do whatever. So we got there Saturday, and I was prepared for, you know, candor, vulnerability. You know, this is unprecedented.
Friday, right?
People, Friday. Yep, Friday. And I was prepared that, okay, people are going to talk about this. There are probably people who just have to process this or start talking through some of this or how they're feeling. There was none of that. It was on the Jumbotron. They showed Instagram, you know, you can obviously do a tag poll and display it on a Jumbotron. It was like anybody who had made a post about what had happened. And then they walked all the athletes out. They stood there for a moment
of silence.
And then they walked off. And then they played Was it 2 songs? They were
See
like
you again.
from Fast and the Furious, which is a funny story we'll have to get into sometime, but like it felt weird. Like that choice of song
It felt
because it was used in a movie.
and incomplete.
It felt cheesy. Its use in this context felt cheesy.
Yeah.
And cheap. And then they just walked off, and then they started the events, and nobody said anything about, taking a moment. So in the first event, they line up the teams, and some of them don't start.
Yep.
They observe a moment before they start. And it just felt. And then you notice, because, I don't know exactly how it went down behind the scenes, but obviously some people had decided not to continue. And so there were all these gaps and people missing. And that almost, to me, as I was starting to process even just a little bit, made it, I mean, it was difficult, for lack of anything better to say about it.
In a time where if there's one thing you can fall back on, it's that CrossFit is the community of fitness.
Right.
And in that moment where they continued to move forward, and in that moment where we kind of realized how the tone of the weekend was going to go, I thought this was anything but community.
No, I thought somebody would speak. Somebody would say something, but it was like, even the person who read, like, and now a moment of silence felt robotic.
Yeah.
It didn't feel how I would. It wasn't anybody we knew. It wasn't anybody within the community. It literally felt like they had hired a voice actor.
Yeah. Yep.
And you didn't see Dave. You didn't see Dave. You didn't see Don. You didn't see anybody, that you recognize from HQ. I didn't see them. So if they were on the side or we had a good view of everything.
I'll never presume to know what anyone from HQ, all the way down to volunteer staff, all the way up to CEO and VP and whatnot, were feeling. I'll never presume to know that. But there is a way to seem a little warmer, a little more human.
Mm-hmm.
And it was not that day or the rest of that weekend.
No, it was
Having
not.
said that, it was hard to know exactly how to come away from the weekend. What I am very proud of, and that I'm glad that we did, was, I love that we stayed and supported whatever the decision was, not because we felt, I don't think we felt like guilty continuing on, because that's not our call. I feel we felt a form of responsibility to everyone we knew that was there, putting on a smile, making sure the work was done, the athletes that decided to stay on the floor, like the collective of people who responded. Like, HQ says we are still going. Everybody had a choice. Some people left, totally within their right. Good for you. Like, I'm glad you regulated that well. And then there were other people, friends, athletes, that not only continued on, but continued on with a smile, knew that people were going to be looking for the CrossFit Games experience, the affiliate experience, the vendors, all this other stuff. And they continued on. And they continued on with a smile on their face. They continued on with 16 to 18-hour work days. That is what I think I'm most happy and proud of, is that our crew supported that and made sure that was kind of our charter.
I'll take it on a different turn. The more I've processed, the angrier I've become that they continued. I feel strongly nobody should have been forced to choose.
Yeah.
in that moment, knowing what we were going through. Nobody should have been put in that position. That's what leaders are for. They make the call, right? They make the call. It's a hard job. And it has its really great moments when we're doing really well, but it also has some really dark moments. And in those moments, that's where you are needed most to lead and to make the call. And that's the call that I feel they should have made. Now, I don't control that.
Right.
What we did control was what we decided to do next. And as you said, we decided that for the people who had decided to continue for whatever their reasons or their processing was at the time, we were going to be there to to support them. And it was difficult because, like, they always say don't read the comments. Unfortunately, I live in the comments, and there were a lot of people making some really harsh judgments on athletes, on HQ staff at the level that we know.
Yeah.
People who, attended the events as we did. And I feel that was unfortunate. I think we were doing what we felt was best for the community at the time with what we were being presented. And I don't feel anybody should be judged with however they decided to go forward. And like you said, we just showed up and we tried to be emotional support animals for literally everybody we saw. And thankfully we have a great team. And while on the surface, or, from a vantage point outside of us, it may have looked like we weren't being sensitive to it. We very much were. I cannot tell you how we completely disassociated in order just to be present and as positive as possible, given the gravity of the situation we were in.
And, we've been around a long time. We have a lot of connections in the community. Like, this is our space. And realistically, I feel like anybody who was not there, judge away all you want. You weren't there to read the room. You might not have the connections in the relationship to this sport and to this community that we do. I was thanked several times in my decision to act and be as I was going to be. I was thanked several times for several different things, that whether it was discussions, communications, and just checking on people. I was thanked several times for that from people that are very important to me. And through that alone, I knew that we made the right choice as far as those being our actions and those being our follow through.
Yeah. It's like I said earlier, if you can't make the right choice, make the choice right. And we literally just tried to live that through the whole weekend, up until the moment we left.
And then the moment we left, dissociation started to crumble.
Oh gosh.
Everyone we know that was there cried many a times.
I mean, I've lost people. You've lost people. We didn't know him.
No.
I don't think I knew I would be sad. I knew I would be sad for the community. I knew I would be angry. I just wasn't prepared. I think for how hollow I felt waking up on Tuesday.
Yeah.
I cried inexplicably all day for like 2.5 days. Like, I'm crying now. I can feel it. Like, there's just a feeling that every time I think of him and I think of more and more about those moments when we arrived and what was going on, truly, it's very difficult.
Yeah.
And to feel like you were adjacent to it while it was happening, there's just something that I'm still processing with that.
And to be honest, coming from my own traumatic experiences in the state of Texas and other things, it's to me, it's going to feel incomplete for a while.
Yeah.
It's one of those ones, the hardest part, some of the hardest parts about it is like, we're deeply empathetic. We understand, like, I can't imagine the family effect, the community, like you just see these pouring out hearts of people that knew him, but also the lack of knowledge in and around when it happened. Like we're just clamoring for answers. We're clamoring for some type of closure and some type of, why did this happen? How did this happen? Can we make sure, it doesn't happen? Closure, something that brings peace to the moment. And I don't foresee that happening anytime soon.
Yeah. Yeah. I said to somebody else that, for so many of us, this sport and you and I have the unique vantage point that I feel like not many of us can be part of that club is we've been around for 12 plus years now.
Yeah. That's
and
16 years for me this year.
Yeah. You're my best friend. I met you in a gym. I met you in CrossFit. I've met people that were there on the day my daughter was born, like truly people I would consider family. And when you think about the third place it's become for so many people, and you think about how we use it to cope for so many things happening outside of it, it shakes you to your core that something like this happened. And in my mind, and I'm sure we'll get into this next, it was maybe not preventable, but it definitely was a failure.
Yeah.
And that feels like it's a very betrayal, broken heart feeling.
Yeah. You expect more from a community that you devote this much time and energy to.
Yeah. Yeah. Right? Absolutely.
All the way up to the HQ, all the way up to the governing body.
Yep. It's, and again, I know we'll get there, but like the sport definitely failed him. Mm-hmm. And we cannot confidently say that as much as we have prepared for the unknown and unknowable, that the sport did the same for us here. We didn't do everything possible to keep them safe. And we, meaning everyone, because we are all at least somewhat accountable, whether we like to believe so or not.
Yeah, with actions or inactions afterwards too.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely.
Jes kind of segued into it, where do we go from here? I'm gonna lead that off by acknowledging that I did have an opportunity while we were at the games with other affiliate owners and HQ. They put on, I believe it was Saturday morning, it was deemed to be a Q&A with the VP, Jay Fossum, and the CEO, Don Fowle, in the affiliate experience, which is if you're a CrossFit box owner or a +1 to that box owner, you get a pass and you get to go back there and basically interact with a lot of the key people involved in this event, Jocko, push press, all these things. And so, of course, Saturday morning, we're looking for an opportunity to find out more detail and have an open discussion. I won't go into the details that led to me asking my question, because I have no problem blanket stating this. I believe it was about 45 minutes of toxic positivity and looking away from what was going on that weekend, in my opinion. Having said that, they opened up the last few minutes to an actually open Q&A. I believe around 5 or 6 questions were asked. I was the last question of the day. The ones previous to me, they asked questions of the affiliate council that were there. That is just a representation of the affiliates with these longer standing gym owners. And a lot of them were questions about the affiliate and HQ relationship. Not that that's a bad topic, but it was everybody knowing there was an elephant in the room and nobody was talking about it. I understand CrossFit HQ is a business and has to position themselves and discuss things in a certain way, especially as information unfolds. I asked my question in the framework of CrossFit affiliates are essentially foot soldiers to HQ as a community, right? We are the people that people talk to about CrossFit. Nobody's calling up CrossFit HQ and saying, I heard CrossFit was dangerous. They come to my affiliate and talk to me about that. So my question to them was, what are they doing to prepare my coaches that have 2 to 4 hours of coaching in the week for the people that come in and ask about this? Because I'm a firm believer that when a trauma like this happens and someone loses their life, there is going to be a villain. There is no way there's no way there's not. Somebody has a villainy tag attached to them. And it doesn't have to be a defining tag, but it's going to be there. It's going to be part of the journey. So I asked my question. One of the affiliate owners responded with a very, courteous statement, but at the end of the answer, they cut off the Q&A and it was not answered. The opportunity came after this. I have a good friend. He said, hey, I'm going to get you in front of Jay, the VP, to have a little bit more discussion because they didn't actually answer my question. Me and Jay discussed things for about 10 minutes. And what I had essentially told Jay was, I don't know the actual practice. Forgive me for not knowing that. But the idea that I believe it is like East Asian cultures, that when a priceless piece of porcelain or some type of art, right, like physical art is busted or broken or cracked, they don't destroy it and they don't try to just patch it. They fill it with gold. There's a gold vein through things that have broken. And they do that because it represents that there is trauma to this piece of art, but the trauma has made it look more beautiful, more unique, right? Mm-hmm. It is part of the journey and it keeps it part of it. I said, that's what CrossFit needs to find right now. It's the gold fill, the thing that makes the overall arcing story of this brand way more beautiful, and understanding that there is growing pains with this stuff. And we had talked some details as to what I believe was best fit. I think that's our next step. After the conversation went, I feel there was a 50-50 shot of whether or not I was actually hurt. Right? Yeah. They're AP, they're a business. I get it. I got more time than I wanted. I took the opportunity as a good time to get what I believed to be the right steps forward and the right awareness. I have no clue if they heard me, but I do know that about a dozen affiliate owners after that thanked me for asking the question. And that's one of those ties-ins where I'm like, okay, who knows if we did the right things, but at least there I did something that, to my people that have a similar mind frame to me when it comes to this space, I got thanked for it. So that's actually, that was one of my better moments from the week as far as processing and doing the most with what I could.
Yeah. I obviously CrossFit is in private equity and they are in a careful state of risk and issue management over this. I mean, I think anybody who has been around life knows that there's a lawsuit coming and they can't portray or verbalize any accountability or fault, right? Which is unfortunate because we are a business, unfortunately, that is supposed to be a human-centered business where we feel that we are owed more candor and transparency. And so that adds to the ick factor of what we're all feeling right now, that we're not getting, right? That being said, again, since we've been around for 12 plus years at this point, we know that this isn't a one-off. It's not a one-off. There have been plenty of near misses.
Yep.
And, just as we said that the environment around this year's games felt different and almost disjointed as an afterthought, it just felt like a lot of things were shortcut, simple things. And I felt it when we arrived at the first event. Mm-hmm. There wasn't the level of water safety we've had in previous years. Athletes voiced concerns about the temperature of the water, the order of the events, the idea that we were having this in Texas in August in the first place. It
that just been talked about since it was announced.
Yeah, it was immediate that people were concerned. And I think, as others have pointed out, CrossFit has a bit of a culture problem to work through. Business, they have a problem to work through, but it's like people, processes, culture. Something has to be looked at differently.
Yeah, I agree. I think, and the thing that's tough that we just talked about earlier is that it takes leaders to do that. It takes a certain level of leadership, a certain level of, in this instance, admitting that you were wrong, admitting that mistakes were made, admitting that you should have heeded concerns stronger, created better processes around those concerns. And obviously we said we didn't want to get into speculation, but we do have some notes as far as we're not employees of HQ. We're just deep CrossFit enthusiasts for almost 2 decades for me, 12 years, 14 years for Jes. And so knowing that body of knowledge and seeing CrossFit not only as a brand and as a sport evolve, and knowing people who work with the company and athletes who've competed, I think we have a good perspective. I don't think it's a perfect one. I think there's plenty of stuff to be discussed, but I do think that we have a good perspective on both the entity itself, the sport, and if the community is going to stay together and expect to grow, where we could start pointing the direction.
Yeah, I think you call it something good. Neither of us is trying to be a bench commentator, right? I'm not one of those people who is demanding perfect or things that like are not possible, right? But I think there's a real culture problem in CrossFit that led to almost a hubris-soaked arrogance
Mm-hmm.
around the programming of the games, around how we treat athletes with concerns,
Mm-hmm.
and even, you know, react to any feedback. I mean, feedback has been given many times. They've had near misses multiple times. And it just seems like every time it can't possibly because we could improve, which just goes to me against the very thing that we're supposed to be about.
Yeah. Yep.
And I don't know how to fix it. You know, we always talk about my leadership development, you know, clarity, climate, and competence. And, you know, it just seems there's a lot of work to do. It's not just a few small changes. It's like a lot of small changes to affect the big change that's necessary.
Absolutely. On that note, would you want to start with the changes for the games or HQ overall arcing? I think we have some good perspective on both.
You know, you've been to regionals, you've coached athletes. I think, you know, in the immediate, the things that we could do for sport would be helpful.
I think the sport should be the simplest thing moving forward, because there are sports to reference for materials. You don't have to reinvent the wheel for this to categorize it as a sport. There are particular things that make a sport a sport. When it comes to CrossFit, the one thing I've always noticed about it, at least in most years, because like you said about the hubris and ego soaked and stuff, the sport has been more about battle of attrition and survivability rather than a very fundamental principle of CrossFit: measurable, repeatable, and consistent. That does, to me, that does not come out in a lot of the tests. I used this example earlier with my wife. I said, it's like going in for your French lit final and then the teacher randomly being like, okay, now we're going to go take this test outside. It's like, is that variable necessary to make this test, like really test your knowledge base? No. And when it comes to the world of fitness, what we're testing for is the fittest on earth. We know human physiology. We know exercise physiology. We know, you know, all these disciplines that tie into what could be construed as the fittest on earth. Those tests can be measurable, repeatable, consistent without the factors of a lake swim, right? Was it last year they had a swim in the pool with a ski erg next to it? The 2021, they had a lap pool again. So it's like, it's an element where if you're going to include it in the definition of how you're testing the fittest, you have to deliver it to where it's consistent, measurable, and repeatable. A variable like an outside lake, a man-made lake, is not, to me, the most observable, measurable, repeatable thing that you can do as far as a fitness test goes.
No. And I think, I mean, we crammed into an Uber on Sunday night, and, you know, I don't expect a lot of people to know what happened. Fort Worth was kind of an interesting city overall, but our Uber driver, we were explaining what happened, and we told her what lake it was. And she was like, why would they do a swimming Why would they do a swimming event there? There's so much debris in that
So
lake.
dangerous. That's
so those were your exact words. That lake is so dangerous.
Yeah. And we just kind of laughed because out of disbelief, because this is a local.
How does the Uber driver have a better risk assessment of this lake?
There's plenty of aha moments where we knew things had gone wrong from the weekend. But in my opinion, when it comes to the sport, drop the military survivability, adaptability essence to the programming. Make some of the most legitimate tests, balanced tests as it relates to what you could feasibly do in a 3 to 5 day competition. And then you address the spectacle aspect. Because to me, a sport has to have an element of a spectacle. That's the whole idea, is that there is viewership. There are people appreciating the physicality, what these people are going through with the defined measurable tests.
Right.
And that's how a sport is created. That's how a sport works. With that in mind, it will require, and I do love that this is coming out more, entities like the PFAA, right? They have been the basically the athletes association that is speaking on behalf of the group of athletes to CrossFit HQ, CrossFit the sport, and expressing concerns, expressing what they need, what they want. That process needs to get refined, much like a players' union. It's
like a collective bargaining. It's collective bargaining, right?
Exactly. It's a sport entity meeting with the core group, the cohort of the sport participants, coming to negotiations and making sure they work each year. Such a simple process. Other sports have done this. We are 17 years into CrossFit Games. Why is this something that we are not doing, especially when we have a sport driven from a very vocal community as is?
Well, I mean, let's call it what it is. There has been a rebuke of efforts for collective bargaining because of the culture in CrossFit to be that essence of military survivalism, and I don't even know how to do, again, hubris soaked arrogance, or arrogance soaked hubris. There's that element in this sport that, let's face it, Brent Fikowski's been a very vocal advocate, very outspoken about that organization, the PFAA. And the comments in anything he has tried to post have literally been disgusting.
Yep.
Calling him words I won't repeat here, calling him weak, calling him a whiner. It was the same when they announced the games in Texas, and they spoke out early about the risks and the safety issues with that.
Yep.
And the comments on that old post are disgusting, kind of ironic to read now, and tragic, because it's this idea of die for points. If it hurts and it's dangerous, just go harder. Whatever tagline you want to attach to it.
Yeah.
It's like demented cat posters.
Yeah, there's a reason we were joking 10 years ago that this would be the 2024-25 CrossFit Hunger Games at some point.
I mean, we say that almost every year. I will say that the years that Boz was programming, I felt better somehow.
No, I absolutely did. And I will go back to my original thought from Glassman: observable, measurable, repeatable. That's what Boz's tests were, with a brilliant CrossFit flair.
He told a good story. There was still, we talk about central casting and people that have amazing stories. His workouts were great for visibility and great for watchability.
And consistency of the test for everybody. There was nothing that seemed like it was designed to have an unfair advantage for one type of athlete or another. And I hate to say that, but like, you know me, I'm a strength athlete. I love the Olympic lifts. He threw in the sandbag, which to me was so brilliant, and everybody thought it was going to fall flat. And it was one of the most watched events in CrossFit Games history, to my knowledge. And it's because the Olympic lifters didn't have a skill that, the former collegiate soccer player didn't have, or anything like this. Time under the barbell was an idea. The idea that this is a load that you need to be able to move to a standard based on your own size and body frames. That's it. That's all it was. It was the simplest thing. And it was one of the most exciting events to watch.
Yeah.
And
I mean, the Capitol's still our favorite,
Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah.
There was hope, but I do believe the sport needs to start considering these tests like a sport would: observable, measurable, repeatable, strict confines, and the communication between the athletes involved and the governing body of programmers, which, to be completely honest, I do not think the same programmer should be used that many years in a row. I think that Boz did a great job, but I would love a growing rotation of lead programmers or a collective of programmers working on that. I think that also legitimizes it, because then you have fresh ideas. And then beyond that, the athletes union, whatever you want to call it, PFAA, and them need to develop systems between them to make sure not only communication is streamlined, but the athletes can know what to expect from the governing body. And the governing body can make sure that where the rubber meets the pavement is appropriate for the athletes.
Yeah, a more transparent process around collective bargaining, and then EAP would be really great.
That legitimizes the sport further and makes it more safe. Like,
it absolutely does. I think, I came from Chicago before I came to Dallas, and I was telling people where I was going after, I was going to be in Chicago for a few days, and people that were at the event I was at were like, oh yeah, that's that like crazy kind of weird athletic event with like, almost the Hunger Games, like you said. And I will never be embarrassed or anything but grateful for CrossFit for so many reasons. However, in that moment, I was like, you're not wrong. You're not wrong. I would love to see this legitimized more. Absolutely.
I agree.
But I think that goes to the broader cultural problem we need to address. And I mean, we're not here to dive into what CrossFit needs to do necessarily, but
let's. No, I think that's I think you hit the nail on the head with that we have in the notes here, and we've talked about it until we were blue in the face for the past week. The sport of fitness is way different and not along the same lines as the charter of what I believed CrossFit to be when I first found it. And it was lifelong health and fitness. The goal was to make yourself as physically capable as you could, eat fuel that was appropriate for you, and make sure that overall fitness and health wise, you were covering your bases to make sure that essentially aging, you were doing it successfully. Like you got older better.
Yep.
And that is not the sport of fitness. A lot of people think that they coincide, but just because they're under the governing body. Anytime you turn something competitive, I believe it goes unhealthy. So that's why when you compete at this sport, it can be deemed unhealthy for a lot of reasons, injuries, stuff like that. When you go to the essence of what the culture should be, the mission, the vision, it is about health. It is about wellness, but in a proactive sense.
Yeah. It's the difference, and if you're not a CrossFitter, maybe this will help, but it's the difference between the methodology itself and the sport.
Yep.
Right. It's the idea that what we do in the gyms every day is not the same as what happens at the CrossFit Games. And we say that to everybody who comes in the door, because let's face it, there is kind of a fear of doing CrossFit because they associate the two as the same thing. It's not. So, yeah.
Yeah. And I think when it comes to the broad brushstroke of HQ as a whole, that's where their, in my opinion, winning combo is going to come from. Because we're at this really funky part where you have the old school mentality where everybody thinks it's just about toughness. It's just about intensity. It's that live hard lifestyle, yada, yada, yada. And then you have the people that see the principles behind it, the mission, the lives affected in the affiliates, and they're at odds. However, we were all brought together under the same umbrella. CrossFit's original philosophies, original, vision and mission, the education material that showed up, brought us the health, wellness, sickness continuum. That is a great measure for illustrating what life journey we want people to be a part of. All of that is what CrossFit needs to start leading with, being very vocal with, and also giving the affiliates the content with, to provide them like, hey, I heard somebody passed away in CrossFit. That is part of our journey now. Like, and people need to very respectfully understand that is part of the brand now. I hate to say it, but it is. But you need to be able to pull from, that's not what CrossFit's methodology is about. It was a terrible tragedy in the sport in which CrossFit has built into. Did you know CrossFit spent $500,000 on scholarshiping teachers to make sure they could teach fitness and nutrition to kids in PE rooms? Did you know that CrossFit Med Society immediately posted up, mental health care protocols, that they're constantly turning this over, that they're going towards cancer research, they're going towards diabetes research. Like, there is a lot of stuff that CrossFit as a governing body does that is beautiful, and the reason we decided to back it. And it's all falling by the wayside. It's all going behind the curtain, and nobody's really talking or structuring how to lead with that or have that as the forefront to differentiate between the sport of fitness and what CrossFit is.
Yeah. And it's again, I'm not going to bench commentate. Like, I know people are working really hard behind the scenes.
Yeah.
For whatever is going to come next. I was just disappointed in the things that could have happened pretty easily in the immediate aftermath that did not. And I think that has made things very difficult for people on the ground who are working in affiliates and the athletes who were there, whether or not they continued through the weekend or left. So I think that's my current position.
Other than the rant I just went on, I apologize, but I've been thinking about this for a long time. As I told Jess the other day, forgive me for ranting, but I've had a week. I, more than anything, would say, if you're interpreting this situation or if you're in the space, really lead with empathy, really try to communicate with anybody whose livelihood or career or their life has been affected by this particular entity, because that was one of the things I have been trying to do a lot. Because while I am, I've been in the space for a long time, but I'm not with HQ. I'm not having to respond to dozens, hundreds, thousands of affiliate owners like some of my friends are. More than anything, with anybody who is running through these processes, like, thank you for doing that. Like, I'm speculating from the outside just as a coach. I can't imagine having to put on my regular work face and doing all this stuff without outlets like this. And I definitely can't imagine it to where I'm working so closely with so many affiliate owners or so many representatives in the community and not being able to say anything, not being able to deliver the comfort on behalf of the entity, because you can't.
Yeah. I think that's a really good call out. And, like I said, I'm not trying to make anybody's life harder by directing any criticism or question, but it has to happen. And we have to figure out some dialogue and some way of communicating so that this doesn't happen again. There's no way to eliminate risk entirely in anything.
Yep.
But as people so committed to health and wellness and so committed to community, I don't ever want to have to be adjacent to or part of something where we can't say with absolute certainty we did absolutely everything we could to prevent it.
Right.
That's just not in my ethos. It's not my value system. And I know it's the same for so many other people in this community. So we have to do something.
I will caveat / passenger off of that. I know that there are better ways to do things. I know there are, because look what happened with the way things panned out, right? we know there's got to be a better way. Better decisions can be made. And I really would have trouble if a governing body, company, sport had things happen like this and they were so arrogant that the only path forward with them was minimum, news following the thing to prepare for, damage to the brand, minimum communication about making it right for those gravely affected, namely his family. And really trying to almost move past it too quickly, too broadly, to where you almost don't even acknowledge it. Like, I feel like moments like this, especially when a passing happens, you do not rush the marinade. You have to let it process. This community is still very tight knit. It's still very niche, and it's still very communicative. Like, if you try to broadly stroke past this, you're going to see an exodus possibly beyond when everything happened with Greg Glassman. And that's because the foundational core principles and message that we all agree to, that we all bond over as far as the community of fitness, will be rattled. It will be put into the context that the thing you believe in, their number one priority out of a traumatic situation like this, is to just move past it, brush it off, let it roll over the shoulders, minimize the damage involved, and keep looking forward. That's not going to work this time.
No, I definitely think we've all been, like I said, this is not the first time. This is not the first near miss. There have been many. And I think, what I regret is we were too easily silenced by people who don't share those best interests.
Yeah.
Who are here for the survivability, here for the extremes. And I refuse to be silenced again by certain voices in this community who continue still, even after this happened, to be arrogant about it.
Yeah, no, this is a reflective moment. This is not a moment to double down.
Yeah, it really is not.
So, and if anybody has made it to the end of this podcast episode that is going on, I believe we're on an hour. I'm really happy that we covered everything that we wanted to cover. I don't feel like we're being judgmental at all on this situation. I feel like you and I are pretty good about riding that line of, being as objective, but also very firm in how we see things. But if you're making it to the end of this and, CrossFit's in your sphere, just know that in my opinion, the guiding principles and philosophy behind what CrossFit is meant to be will continue on no matter what. Absolutely. I firmly believe that, because in general, that is how you and I and several people we know, colleagues, friends, otherwise, work. It's just the way it is. If you have or know anybody in the CrossFit space that is having to act based on CrossFit HQ, the sport and stuff like that, I'm talking coaches, I'm talking athletes, I'm talking any community members, stuff like that, just let them just know that they are going through a very confusing spot right now. And leading with empathy on that is probably the best bet, because none of us have the answers. A lot of us probably won't have definitive answers for quite some time. And it's incredibly difficult moving forward with having so much unanswered for us in general. So we're doing the best we can with everything. I'm trying to reach out to all my friends at HQ, anybody that's a coach or an affiliate owner right now, because it's a very, very confusing, very funky time. And without the leadership that we feel is necessary, it's going to be up to us to kind of do it within.
Yep, absolutely.
That does it for me. I think we covered as much as we could. I feel like we're going to be unpacking more and more of this as things develop. If anybody in the sphere that is close to the family or close to his brother or anything like that hears this, know that our hearts and our feelings go out for you guys. The love for Lazar and his impact on the community and the positivity that I can see that he has spread to his fellow competitors. There's a reason that this hits so hard. There's a reason that there's such a profound ripple effect. And it starts because the person that we sadly lost was truly a good person.
So valuable. So valuable.
Yeah, had so much value and so much presence in a lot of people's lives. And that's why it's carrying this much. I've never met the man in my life, but I can tell from what I have seen that I would have liked to have been around him.
Yeah, absolutely.
We hope everybody navigates this if it is in your space. We hope you navigate it as well as possible.
Reach out if you need help.
More than happy to discuss soundboard and just be there, because realistically, it's what we all need.
Yep.
On that note, have a great week. Stay positively jacked.